Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. Our conversation this evening comes from Sarah Harrison, the novelist, Laurie Taylor, Professor of Sociology at York University, Stephen Oliver, the composer, and Nicholas Tucker, lecturer in psychology at Sussex University. We have music from Instant Sunshine. Speaking of which, it's a phrase that my friend used, what comes out with the sunshine? He lyrically inquired. A friend of mine who was wearing the last pair of fruit salad Bermudas to be seen on a private behind since 1972. Well, I said, in my immediate circle, my younger daughter declares the freckle season open. They seem to impart a Devonshire toffee flavour to her cheek when I give it a little chew. And as far as I'm personally concerned, what comes out with the sun is a small red bump under my left eye. What comes out for the rest of you?
Well, yes, it has to be flesh, doesn't it, in all its glory? I mean, it's ironic that we're generally labelled a reserved and phlegmatic race, but now, when you look at film, or even when you observe, in reality, the sun-kissed beaches of the Med, there are the bodies beautiful laid out there kippering, or at least the bodies moderately beautiful. But go and watch the British en masse on any pebbly beach, and you will see... you will receive an optical mugging everywhere as vast heaps of sort of ambulant nutty slack and spaghetti and blancmange and hearth rugs and bacon rind.
Also, when they take their clothes off, feet come out with the sun. And feet are most peculiar things. And I don't know whether I find myself counting the number of toes that people have got because their feet look so strange that you wonder what it is that's odd about them. Could it be an extra toe, perhaps?
But it's not so much flesh itself as the disposition of flesh, isn't it? I think there's something very old and atavistic going on here. I think it's what one of the poets used to call the vegetable soul coming out. Everyone is aspiring to photosynthesis, turning unnaturally towards the light. I think it's, on the whole, in summer, people want to attain to become heliotropes.
What's a heliotrope?
A heliotrope is a flower...
Didn't they used to signal with them?
No. A flower whose only purpose is to focus on the sun.
Well, what magnificently comes out, as I'm able to attest from a visit to Swanage during the week, when I drop a name, I drop a good one. Swarms and swarms of grey, curly-haired ladies in coaches, one of whom, in spite of the sun, hadn't divested herself of one of those very tall sort of peaked black cowls that penitents wear in Toledo, during those marches. And as a friend of mine was pointing out the obelisk on the prom, which commemorates a distant battle, he said, there used to be 5 balls on top of that. He said only one dropped off, and she turned round in her deck chair and she said, can we have less of that?
Because it's rather when the sun comes out in England, I get the same feeling as when telecom shares were on sale. I feel that I should rush out and do something about it. It calls for one to go out and maximise one's credit. But, I mean, the fact is that when it comes out for a long time, and Leslie Thomas had a nice phrase about it, he said, when it beams suspiciously like a cheap salesman, that really it shouldn't be out for a long time in England. The real natural state is as though the universe comes to a stop when the sun shines continuously in England.
The English can only make love, for instance, in the rain. Othello meets Desdemona in a thunderstorm. Troilus makes Crusader because she's stuck in the house because she can't get out because of the rain. And Bob, I remember, on this very programme, quoted a wonderful poem about I wish it was raining because then I could get back to bed with my girlfriend. How does it go, Bob? Western wind?
Western wind.
Well,
when wilt thou blow? Yes. You
Precisely.
doggeralised it, of course, but such is your pert way.
But it's quite true what you say about living up to things. I mean, awful things start happening to food and drink in hot weather. I mean, for instance, drinking, what you really need is iced water, but people suffer from this terrible compulsion to fill every glass full of fruit, veg, swizzle sticks and lumps of ice. And then there's the whole thing about eating out. I mean, there are 2 types. You can either buy buy something at a stall in the street, a nice ice or an iced lolly or a juicy peach, and try and appear debonair as you stop the juice dribbling down your front. Or there's this dreadful business of the barbecue. Of course, we bought it, so we must use it. And I sometimes feel that our whole village from June to September is underneath a pall of ghastly smoke, because first of all, everybody brings out their barbies in order to sort of incinerate cheap cuts of meat. And then, towards the end of August, the farmers start burning the fields, as if in kind of revenge at all this middle-class pretension, you know, and sort of fanning the smoke in the direction of the neo-Georgian developments and renovated cottages.
And you also touch on a word there, like outside. When the sun comes out, there's a feeling that people should be outside.
Terrible
Anything
idea.
counts as outside. I mean, the pavement in Mortimer Street, where people arrange their chairs so close to the guttering that passing motorists could lean across out of their window and help themselves to a lager. I mean, the noise there of the road transport going by, but people still refer to this as outside.
The noise made by that couldn't compare with the noise made by the rhododendrons during the week. I mean, they're now absolutely in full throat on great song. They were magnificent in the garden of a garden party I attended, not quite as a waiter, nor yet quite as a guest during the week. And I want to get this right. The hostess pointed and she said, "Isn't the Shamiana magnificent?" And I could see the bush with the large white flowers she's pointing at, poking out from behind, some big coloured tent that was in the way. So I said, "Well, I'm afraid my botany does rather tend to run out once I've mispronounced Kinomeles and Cotoneaster." But I said, "It is splendid." And she said, "Yes, we brought it from India." And I said, Shamiana transplants pretty well, does it?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I think so. Gives the garden a touch of the exotic," she said. "Of course, we take it down after the party, of course." And turned out she'd been talking about this coloured tent. And I was there with a film crew, and she must have thought that all this stuff I was saying was some peculiar professional argot of the tribe.
We're too typical of this programme. We get something really good, like Sunshine, and then sort of proceed to rubbish it. And it seems to me that one of the things that you nearly always are in England is slightly cold, and this means that you walk around with this hunched shoulders, tense neck, your arms rigidly by your side. Now, just every now and again, you get about 3 or 4 warm days, and people literally unthaw. The drinkers come out of pubs. People start talking to each other, just as in Italy, throngs of sort of youths wander the streets, telling you what the latest World Cup score is. And you yourself, it's like walking around and throwing away a suit of armour and actually feeling relaxed for the first time.
Lots of what look like hippies now, whatever that word means, were lolling about at the seaside during the week, and I wondered if you've ever thought about, yes, that's the phrase, opting out. Opting out in a big way, I mean. Such thoughts might well come over you in weather like this.
I'm quite sure the idea of opting out of the rat race in order to put up a sign in...
I hate that phrase, the rat race. But
well, I'm sorry, but somebody has to say something you hate. In order to put up a sign in somewhere like Tregannet saying teas, toilets and open is completely misguided. I mean, you may be opting out, but you're saddling yourself with something far worse. It seems to me that those who do this may be escaping from one rat race, but are just voluntarily incarcerating themselves in something else.
Opting out is merely choosing another path which everyone recognises as a well-trod path. What is really extraordinary about the other immortal souls who inhabit the planet are the people who opt out not only of the social system, but out of the whole system of attention that we pay to each other. I was doing a very sort of middle-class thing, which is walking to my publishers about a couple of months ago.
And I dare say no one could tell you from a perfectly ordinary person.
Usually takes
you didn't wear a sign, "I'm walking to my publishers."
Certainly, on the way, I was passing a hotel in which the kitchens are below the ground, and there were several people sleeping on the pavement, which is warm. And I couldn't quite take this, and I took out a little £5 note and tucked it into a bundle of rags and walked on.
Turned out to be your publisher.
A monstrous thing.
Sorry about that.
The advertising section of my publisher's office, possibly. But I was brought up sharp by a voice that went, "Oi!" So I stopped in the English way one does and turned round very slowly, and this man said, "I don't want your mucking money." The phrase wasn't quite as alliterative as that. But and he scrumpled up the £5 note and threw it back. Now, there is a man not only avoiding the whole social structure that I was inhabiting, but also avoiding pity. Hugh Walpole, not a man you look for social aperçu, came up with a wonderful line in one of his books where he says, I don't want your pity. He says, I just want to attack your comfort. And that's really what worries us about people who opt out. They attack our
The Sun seems to have brought out this appetite for Victorian moralising by Nicholas and Stephen, who are both telling little stories about people coming up to them in the street with messages.
And Sarah's knitting a sampler over there.
I think the problem about opting out is that distance has gone wrong. I remember that when I was young and used to read those books which were all about opting out, like Kerouac's On the Road, finding it very, very difficult to sort of manage to be on the road between Leicester and Liverpool, because, I mean, no sooner were you on the road than you'd arrived in Leicester, and the enormous distances which Kerouac and others drove across having these philosophical thoughts simply, weren't enough for the 90 miles. But the trouble is now that with air transport, that if you decide that you will opt out and you go away, then you have to travel on the plane, and somehow that ruins the idea that you have moved anywhere at all. There's no sort of sense of movement. And indeed, when you saw that so-called hippie convoy the other day, it was always in terms of the road that they were by, and the lay-bys, and the systems of transport. And it seems with systems of transport penetrating every aspect, one part of opting out has disappeared. You can't get lost.
Well, that was my point.
I'd have thought, really, Laurie, there's a paradox here that we all know that I'd have thought most people would agree that opting out, if you actually do it, brings precisely all the miseries that you've heard, that the Gauguin suffering in Tahiti, this sort of business. On the other hand, when you're presented with the notion of opting out, and you say, oh, I wouldn't do that, you start sounding appallingly smug and complacent. And the difficulty is, I think, not to want to opt out, but without at the same time feeling that you've actually solved all the problems with your own particular life. It's a very difficult one to bridge.
You must be content to sound smug. It's very difficult, as you pointed out, to put the case for staying in without sounding smug, without sounding as though you'd stayed, you had survived, but you had stayed moderately uncontaminated. Something, of course, you can't say about yourself. Someone else has to say it.
But they're not mutually exclusive propositions. At the risk of continuing to sound like Mrs. Humphrey Ward, or Maria Edgeworth, I would like to just continue this point that if you have a system, a self-consolatory system like we all live in, with newspapers bolstering up our own view of the world and giving them some identity so that we feel safe, then that only works if we built this little pale around our lives, if we have people who are beyond the pale, doesn't it? So it's very misguided of politicians to say, I would do anything to destroy the hippie commune, or homosexuals, you have to hate the sin and love the sinner, and all that sort of nonsense. It's not a valid way of looking at the pales of society that wrap yourself round, because they will only work if there are things that aren't within the pale.
Yes, and also, I mean, I can't remember now who it was that made the point, but the freedom that we want and the peace of mind that we hope for is, I regret to say, and I'm sorry about the sampler, is within ourselves. And you see people at their most relaxed, at their imaginations at their freest, when they're in the context in which they feel comfortable and familiar. The idea, for instance, that travel broadens the mind is completely wrong. These people who go yomping off around the world, they are constantly beset with torture by decision, where they're going to spend the night, whether they can speak the language, whether they can change the money. All these things, I don't think travel broadens the mind.
And the other thing that
if I can just finish, I feel that the idea, particularly of the open road, the call of the open road, sort of died in the Edwardian era.
I do think you're not right to say that travel can't broaden the mind. When you pick up one of those 1930 Penguin books, travel books, and look at the back and see this man was a paper hanger, a prep school teacher, he worked in the gasworks, he dug graves. It's appalling to think you actually know more and have seen more than he. He has got some advantage over you. The question is that you've both got ways of life that can take defending, not that you've got one he hasn't.
I think the other corrupting image for opting out, because opting out is so much about being alone in an alien environment, and we're so used to seeing people alone in alien environments walking towards a retreating camera team nowadays, aren't we? Therefore it is that image captures it. And I suppose Sarah's talking about being at home and the sort of like the idea that the freedom in one's own house. And I was just one thing that we didn't mention when we were talking about the Sun was apparently Logan Pearsall Smith's last words when he said, "Thank heavens the sun has gone in and I don't have to go out and enjoy it."
The Glastonbury, did you read in the Times, there was a report of a Glastonbury off-licence manager saying he had no objection to serving hippies of the traditional sort with long hair and guitars. And just as, if you remember, in the unreconstructed past, publicans would put notices on their door saying no gypsies. But they wouldn't have minded a traditional gypsy who turned up with rather good tenor voice and a tambourine singing, "I'm only a one," Cavan O'Connor, or Laurie Lee roving out one midsummer's morning. We easily identify with this. I think what we would always be foolish to do is to try and convert that fantasy into fact.
Just talking about prohibitions, I can remember on the counter of a Rome hotel seeing the little sign, "Niente Pellegrini, no pilgrims."
But Sarah has a very acute point here when she says about travelling that one of the things about travelling is the busyness of it, of having to find the next station, having to pack your bags, having to move. And surely that's one of the great advantages of hippiedom. Quite a lot of people don't want to be, as they say in the modern jargon, educated for leisure. Quite a lot of people want to be busy within a framework where they have to find, and it is difficult to find, where they're going to sleep that night, the money they're going to get to earn their bread and so on. There's a whole lifestyle which requires incessant activity.
Well, that's all right. I think the best way of doing all this, if you have these opting out fantasies, is simply to use them as balm or salve or that kind of thing for the situation in which you find yourself. If I happen to know, Sarah mentioned earlier on the idea of a man retiring from what she called the rat race. It does demean the day-to-day struggle for survival, I think, rat race, because a lot of people who opt out of the rat race because they don't have the stamina to run it. But I do know of a man in North Somerset who stopped being something very scientific because he thought he'd come to the end of that. He could have gone sideways and upwards and obtained prestige and power, but it would have been administrative. He sat down and thought, and he did what, again, you would think was like jumping over a cliff. He took a small village stores in the West Country. Now, he's been 3 years there, and for him, the sun shines like it never shone before. I tried to urge to him when I met him that perhaps it was a bit of a fantasy, but for him it's a fact. However, having said that, it's all the other people who do it and don't get it right that I would be worried about.
And I must just say also, Stephen, that these hippies might be very busy repairing their cars, but there's no one busier than the person at home. Once you're at home, there are always 1,000 different jobs you should be getting on with. The only real liberation from that is travel, I'm afraid.
Well, as Mrs. Edgeworth would no doubt say, grass is always greener.
I sat one day trying to devise a quotation that was undeniably a quotation. I mean, a personally devised one. And it was some time ago I did it, but I've never seen the possibility of using it. But at the end of this, I think I do. And I must get it right because I've almost forgotten what it was. What is desired cannot be possessed, since what is possessed cannot be desired. Just work on that while we have a bit of a tune. I'm glad I got it. Better out than in, that's what I say. And what we've got now is instant summer.
The beach drops to an electronic drummer. An ice cream van is chiming on the dune. Yet one beach blaster doesn't make a summer, and one ice cream van doesn't make it June. Naked bodies stretch out on the shingle, suntan oil basting burning skin. Children scream and parents' nerve ends tingle. Surely summer is a-coming in. Yet eager beavers search in sunny places to spot the summer migrant to our shore. The common knotted handkerchief and braces, confirming British summer's here once more. In heat waves on a beach or sunny clearing, as summer sunshine warms the ocean breeze, the common knotted hanky starts appearing, with baggy trousers turned up to its knees, standing in the shallows or reclining, sometimes partly bedded in the sand, red nose and red braces brightly shining, and often seen with cornet in its hand.
regrettably, this fascinating species, Hankeium vulgaris, is rapidly disappearing. Not only is its habitat being invaded by the greater hairy-chested medallion bearer, but also the creature's being hounded to extinction by its ferocious natural predator, the lesser striped deckchair attendant.
Sunburnt spinsters dream of dry martinis. Tattooed triceps ripple in the sun. Crimson bosoms bounce from their bikinis. Does this mean that summer has begun? Gambling granddad's nose is red and shiny. Kick the one-armed bandits on the pier. Wrinkled grannies bubble in the briny. Does this mean that summer's really here? The summer's not arrived until it's spotted from hides along the beaches far and near. The summer's first white hanky neatly knotted, welcoming the sunshine every year.
It's that Irish whistling act I've heard about. Oh, absolutely splendid. Peter Christie. He's slightly blushing. Very good, Peter. Excellent. Now, instead of changing the company's name to Rover, I think BL might have rung the changes a bit and decided on Ponto or even Towser. Well, Rover, as a car, always did have the image, you remember, of a well-trained Celium, housebroken, very faithful, taking its master for a run. Even the horn, when sounded, had a sort of woof-woof about it. The Rover I knew was driven by an uncle who looked very grave when the AA man forgot to salute, and his spouse, who took her turn at the wheel from the back seat, and when the uncle exceeded her own personal speed limit of 28 miles an hour, would say, mistakes will happen in even the best regulated circles. All that association of cars and identity went out with badge engineering, but unsolved mysteries do remain. How could a car be called after a railway station nobody ever got out at, namely Vauxhall? Even Earlsfield would have been preferable. Or the maddest name of all, the Hillman Avenger. With a rubber dagger like that, what could you possibly avenge? But car names are very evocative. I once sat with a man driving me up the M1 who said he was reclaiming the Jaguar for civilization. And my grandma never quite disentangled the source from the motor car. Lee Francis was often Leon Perrins as far as she was concerned. Though she quite properly spoke of the car of her dreams as an Armstrong Tiddley.
Yes, you were talking about Vauxhall before. I always thought many of the Vauxhall names sound rather like old cinemas or tatty hotels. There's the Astra and the Nova for cinemas, and the Belmont and the Carlton are perfect hotels. We always stay at the Belmont because of the television lounge. I mean, it's a perfect place, isn't it? Of course, the problem is with these names that you start off with one name, don't you? You start off with something like the Sunbeam, which is really rather like an Ovaltine. It's like a daytime Ovaltine,
right,
with little sunbeams. But then, of course, as the days of motoring become more brutal and become more virile, then you have to have ridiculous combinations like the Sunbeam Rapier, the Sunbeam Tiger, and the Sunbeam Stiletto.
Yes, ridiculous.
I think some of the names are ridiculous just per se. I can't ever take Rileys seriously because of old Mother Riley. And Oldsmobile cars always strike me as sort of prematurely senile. Porsches I see as a mid-European meat soup. Daimler, it might sound all right in German, but for me it means a large dog.
Yes, and then you have to wonder, how can Daimler-Benz also be Mercedes-Benz? And did Gottfried Daimler run away with someone called Elsa Benz, and then she forsook him for, Carlos Fuentes Mercedes, well known on the Riviera for his two-toed shoes and all that kind of thing, and some sort of ménage à trois was patched up.
Certainly I intend to be true to the great Stop the Week tradition of making authoritative pronouncements of things I know nothing about, but I should just say I've never driven a car in my life, but I'm not going to let a little thing like that prevent me from recording my impression that the names that these ingenious people think of cover up a great dark secret about cars. If you notice, all the names seem deliberately designed to take your mind off the object in question. It's a distraction technique. The commonest is the oxymoron, where two completely disparate things are put side by side, like the Samba. They're a very good little car. Like the Samba Cabriolet, where South American dancers meet the London of Sherlock Holmes. Muse, or the Nova Merit, where Dante combines with Calvin, or the Romeo Giulietta, a hermaphrodite car, or indeed the one someone else mentioned, the Vauxhall Belmont, where Portia meets Captain Macheath. Or there are other names which are merely worrying when attached to cars, like the Charade, which no doubt turns out to be a book, a play, or a film, or the Charleston, which clearly goes sideways while flapping its wheels about, or perhaps worse, the Starlet, which on a hill start is bound to giggle and say, "Not just now, I've got a headache." I don't even think the Swiftian vision of a Hyundai pony is anywhere near the target. No, clearly all this scattering of fantasy is there to disguise the fact that cars are deeply, deeply boring artifacts. Thus, the most honest name turns out to be the Reliant, irresistibly reminding one of the most depressing poster ever printed, Stanley Baldwin smoking a pipe, and underneath the legend, "Safety first."
Now, you could set that to music and you no doubt will. There's an opera in there. You may not have driven the cars, but I can see an opera.
I do agree with Stephen. Aren't they ghastly? You mentioned Riley, Nick, but of course, all that group of names are what I call the naughty schoolboy cars. I mean, there's the Morgan, the Riley, Talbot, Aston Martin, and Morris Minor, that's the stinker of the remove. Please note there's no Morris Major. And then, of course, there's the frankly romantic, which we have the Elite, the Elan, the Vitesse, the Lotus, Alfa Romeo, which is obviously out of top hole by Lothario. But most powerful of all must be this Western motif. And this is surely the self-image of the tiring middle-aged male who longs to be out on the open range astride his faithful cayuse, narrowing his eyes at the wide horizon instead of putting on nursery rhyme tapes for his under-fives. And here they're an absolute plethora of vehicles, which I'm sure come from the showroom with pork and beans sizzling in the glove compartment and a lariat and chaps with a spare tyre in the back. The Rancho, the Prairie, the Husky, the Range Rover, the Land Rover, the Sierra, the Moke and the Mustang. And once I got started, I thought, why haven't we got a Pinto, an Apache, a Huron, a Savannah, a Mesa, a Bronco, a Pecos, a Scout? There was no help.
I'm sure you have.
They need me. They need me.
You've left out a very nasty one that came out not too long ago called the Fuego. I don't know what the car... I think it was a sheep in, wolf's clothing kind of car. But it was the advertising. Do you remember? It was only 3 years ago. There was the line over the big hoarding. It said, "My name is Fuego."
Yes.
And he sounded like Bambi or Dopey out of a Disney film.
It sounded like Violet Elizabeth Bott saying Sago. "My name is Fuego."
Yes, you couldn't say it except with that curious list.
I would like to have a car called a Triumph Catamite, I think. That would be rather a fine
listen,
car.
but you nearly got it, because I could never see the Triumph Dolomite without realising it was the Triumph Sodomite. I mean, that's the way it... Sorry, Triumph Catamite. Good idea.
No one's mentioned... touched on the sexual imagery of the fast cars, because the Jensen Interceptors always sound to me like a splendid contraceptive, really, while the new Ferrari has a Testarossa, which sounds like a hormone injection, which presumably, if you'd got a Testarossa, you'd need a Jensen Interceptor, otherwise...
But, you got some more there?
No, I was only just going to sort of suggest a World Cup team. That was all, and which I thought these sort of names that some of the people have been mentioning lent themselves well to a World Cup. I think we'd have to have Volvo in goal, would we? A safer, like Hillman and Lanchester, I see as the back two, and then sort of midfield, Peugeot, Talbot, Humber and Morris, and then fast, speedy, worrying forwards, Jensen, Riley, Lancia, and, of course, Dodge.
Oh, yeah, but I just want one more, Laurie, very familiar to you, the famous Italian centre forward, Alfa Romeo. Now, this is the car that Laurie drives, and it may either be a little bit...
I don't think there's any place for confession.
No, I'm just going to say that we must always bear in mind creative vandalism. I don't know whether it's vandalism or just he hasn't cleaned the car recently. When I last saw it, the last A on Alpha had become a little bit obscure, so it then read like Alf Romeo, which looked like a fish and chip shop.
Bugatti, of course, sounds like insect repellent. And to come back to Ferrari and Lamborghini, they sound like places on the Mediterranean where the outfall from the municipal works is just a little too near the shore.
Another way of looking at Vauxhall, I was thought Vauxhall's only got the real sounding family. I see an attractive blonde lady called Wyvern, and married to an energetic Victor, with two daughters, Viva and Cresta, and great-uncle Viscount.
The lateral view of English society is borne out by the Japanese, isn't it, who shaped the whole thing, too, to this curious use of English idiom, which no Englishman ever says, like cherry spirit, or a car simply called Sunny, or Laurel, reminding one of those Chinese restaurants where joyous eating may be.
Yes. But you know what used to bother me about that, Stephen, that Datsun, before Japanese cars were so current in England, I used to speak to my cousin in Canada from time to time, and she had a Dats, and every time she said it, I deliberately somehow managed to mishear this word, and I heard it as Dachshund. And it always used to bother me that there was a Dachshund, Sunny, a Cherry, a Stanza, a Bluebird, and a Laurel, and I used to picture, the way fat old ladies have a sort of flotilla of Dachshunds on a multiple lead, and I used to picture them all like this.
Do you remember the Austin Rolls? I know I may have dreamt it, but I don't think I did. I think it was in the early 50s. And some barn pot got the bright idea that what they do is to put a Rolls-Royce engine in an Austin body. A spectacular own goal, because it should, of course, have been the other way round. I mean, no one is going to see someone driving in what is apparently a Rolls-Royce, throw open the bonnet and say, sir, you are an imposter. But the other way round, with the engine, you'd have to keep stopping, and say, look, it's got a Rolls-Royce engine.
Yeah,
people would fall about laughing.
It just reminds me of the worst joke.
It was called the poor man's Rolls. Now, what an advertising gimmick that is.
A cheap Rolls.
Yes, that's right.
We don't really have to stop with car names. We then get on to what's inside them, where I think the same principle applies. Now, I don't know what a torque is. I always imagine it's one of those
hats. It's what you're giving now.
I always thought it's one of the hats that Queen Mary used to wear. Camshaft and crankshaft seem to me like two opposing sociological modes of investigation. The earth connection is a sort of anchor that comes down when you put the handbrake on. Worst of all, the sump. I always see in the car as a sort of final pit where the worst possible sinners are sent for their 7 years punishment.
One of the finest cars, if any of you are interested in dance music, which was ever driven around, was, of course, Ted Heath, who used to go around in his 2-litre Rosa. I always enjoyed that one. Did you know that there was Did you actually know that there was an acronymic car? I mean, I remember there was an acronymic bicycle. There was the BSA, which people... Well, it was hardly an acronym, but people used to sort of compose the letters into bits stuck anywhere. But there was actually a car in 1905 called the Iris, which stood for It Runs in Silence.
What the Hispano...
To 1905 for a moment. I'm just taking up your point about the Rolls-Royce. 1905 is, in fact, the year when W.S. Gilbert perpetrated the worst joke, which you better just get out in the English language, is to write to the manufacturer's Rolls-Royce saying, your car rolls, but it doesn't Royce.
Well, now, Elsa Benz, who was, of course, at Somerville and got a good job in Rio, just lucky she used to laugh, but what happened to the Daimler, of which she was once part? It was reissued. It used to be part and parcel of the apparatus of elderly, affluent widows. Bournemouth, you see a lot of them there, but it was reissued again in the 70s for the middle market, and it showed a rather elderly party saying to his ever-accepting wife, let me get the line, I never thought we'd own a Daimler. And again, that's an own goal, because who wants to join a tribe whose motto is so pitiable as that? I wouldn't have thought so. And thereafter, it just became a badge that they stuck on the front of Jaguars.
But another question is, what's happened to the university car? Morris Oxford, I suppose, could claim some connection with the university, but there's this one called the Ralton University Saloon, which I just have an image of a vice-chancellor sitting in the back waving to the dons, or the Jowett Jupiter. Yes. Again, seems indisputably with the university
You missed out the Hispano Squeezer, creature of myth. Sounds like an orange drink these days, a Hispano Squeezer. Similar to the other old motor car, the Pina Colada. Of course, that was corrupted into Pina Colada when they sold the title.
I just happen to have noticed that one of our own dear Instant Sunshine had a letter in the Times printed. This was ages ago, about 15 years ago, in fact, but it was in response to a...
Just noticed.
So I cut it out and stuck it in my album, and it was the absolute climax to a long correspondence about foreign cars. And this is a paean in praise of British cars, and he says, in reply to the Jensen who wrote the Bentley mocking letter about foreign cars in today's Times, Lotus remembered that it's all too AC to find fault with our rover-burdened car industry, Morris the pity. When woolsey British public realise that our cars can more than hold their own against foreign competition, Vauxhall the fuss about. Riley, I remain, Sir Alvis, your humble servant.
Sarah Harrison, Stephen Oliver, Nicholas Tucker and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Instant Sunshine provided the musical interlude, and the programme was produced by Michael Ember.